Good morning and welcome to the Ocean Harvest Technology Group PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time by the Q&A tab situated in the right corner of your screen. Just simply type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all the questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Mark Williams, CEO. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Thanks everybody for joining us today. You have met a number of us previously, but let me just do a quick introduction before we start and kick off. My name is Mark Williams. I'm the CEO. I've been with the business since the beginning of last year, and we've taken the business through an IPO and fundraising, which a number of you saw us at earlier this year. My previous industry was insect protein, so very similar to this company, producing sustainable feed ingredients to be sold into the animal food chain. Haddon?
Good morning, I'm Haddon Graham. I joined Ocean Harvest almost 3 years ago as Chief Commercial Officer. I spent 10 years before that in academia. Took one of my projects from there into, and this is my fourth startup since that, all in the animal feed area. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy Cox. I'm the interim CFO. I joined the business at the end of May. I'm a career interim specialising in startups, systems implementations, change management projects. I've joined the business to do a number of specific objectives whilst the permanent recruitment takes place. I've been focusing on improving reporting and financial analysis and moving on now to an ERP implementation, which will be complete before the end of my project. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So just a quick refresh on what Ocean Harvest Technology does. The business of Ocean Harvest Technology is based on the research that the company has done, which demonstrates that the polysaccharides and other bioactive compounds in certain species of seaweeds have a prebiotic effect in the gut microbiome of animals. So the research that the company has done demonstrates that when you include our blend of seaweeds as a feed ingredient, usually at an inclusion rate of around 0.25%, when fed to different species of animals, the research we've done highlights a number of benefits which are observed. So they typically are lower mortality rates in the animals, higher growth rates in the animals. There are instances where our customers use our ingredient as an antibiotic replace in animal diets, and overall feed efficiency improvements. So i.e. less feed needed to get the same production benefits out of animals. So lower cost, lower economic, environmental footprint. The three key pillars for growth of our business and strategies of our business, we've talked about them before. It's research and development. So we have the body of R&D which already demonstrates the applications and the benefits of what our product achieves when fed as an ingredient to animals. So with the money we recently raised in the IPO, the ongoing R&D is twofold. One, to support our potential target customers in their efforts to trial the product and see those benefits in their own systems before buying the product. And two, conducting our own R&D to demonstrate additional applications and benefits that our product can achieve. We've seen initial benefits in a number of extra areas, and we're now spending the money to do full life cycle R&D through different species to prove that. The second area is sales and marketing. The animal feed industry that we operate in is a very big sector. It's $500 billion globally. I think the additive space that we specifically operate in is a $40 billion a year market. So the investment that we make is in the B2B channels from our global sales team into the nutritionists and procurement departments of the large animal feed companies. We invest in the time it takes to convert those customers through their acquisition cycle as they trial the product. And through that, we build a pipeline of customers who are engaged with us and actively trialing our product. And that gives us a very clear visibility as to where our future growth will come from. The third element of investment and strategy is in seaweed supply. The seaweed supply is global. I'll talk a bit about today some of the developments we've made, But we need to grow the supply out of our existing suppliers and find suppliers in new regions to diversify the supply chain and increase the biomass that we can buy. And at all times, making sure that we achieve the sustainability and social responsibility benefits that harvesting our seaweeds achieve. The market that we operate in was recently commented on by the World Bank. They released this report in August, and it's very available online. It acknowledges that seaweed's been used for many years in a lot of industries, but it highlights 10 industries or investigates 10 industries where they see growth for the use of seaweed. The top 4 that they mention are animal feed, pet feed, methane reduction additives, and biostimulants. And Ocean Harvest Technology is in 3 of those 4 sectors. It's an independent report. It mentions Ocean Harvest a number of times. Firstly, it goes in to talk about the benefits of the prebiotic effect of seaweed, and even mention a number of our products and the benefits that our product demonstrate in a number of species such as swine, bovine, and poultry. It also talks about the supply chain of seaweed. This report talks a bit more about cultivated seaweeds as opposed to the wild sourced seaweeds that we use. But in any respect, it mentions again Ocean Harvest Technology as being a leader in developing these supply chains. So it's a big report. The synopsis is quite short and makes very interesting reading. We are very pleased that it just supports what we're saying and acknowledges that there's very strong growth available in the seaweed sectors. So we're here to talk to you about the first half of 2023. Some of the highlights, which we've announced in our RNS this morning, are on here. Clearly, beginning of the quarter, we completed our intellectual property, our IPO, which raised £6 million and has kept the company well funded. Through that first half, we've grown product revenues at 66% to total 1.6 million revenues in the first half. Pleasingly, we've had significant margin improvement in that time. We've grown our gross margin by 150% from the first half of last year. And that's come from a number of reasons. You'll hear us talk about it a bit today. The gross margin percentage has risen from 24% to 36%, and that's through efficiencies we've achieved on the pricing side and also on the cost side. And so as a result of the IPO and this strong financial performance, we're very well funded. We've got no debt on the balance sheet, and we're in a good position to keep growing. Looking a little bit more at the revenue and the margin story, you can see here there's the data of the absolute revenue, absolute gross margin, and the gross margin percentages for each of the last 3 halves. The growth has been driven by new customer additions. We've onboarded over 10 new customers. I think we had our first customer from India, a very large market, and growth in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. The revenue growth has been driven by, in addition to the volume growth, the growth in pricing. So we've increased prices for legacy customers, and we're also seeing that as we onboard new customers, we're getting higher pricing and higher margin from those new customers. In addition to the revenue side, there's been a number of benefits achieved through sourcing and production, which are helping us in the gross margin level. I'll talk about that when I go through the supply. Here is the volume growth that we've seen in product. A continuation of the chart that we showed you at the IPO. So this is quarterly volumes in tons. You can see it's consistently growing. I think we achieved 40% volume growth in the first half as the first half of last year, which is consistent with what we reported last year. And then obviously the revenue on top of that has been higher, given the factors that I've spoken about on average selling prices. Supply, I mentioned, is one of the key investment and strategies for the business. We've made a lot of progress on our supply in the first half of 2023. We started sourcing from the Philippines for the first time since before the pandemic. We found a new supplier there. We started working with them in Q4 of last year, and as quickly as Q1 of this year, we started receiving shipments of seaweed from them. With any new supplier, you need to quickly get them on board and get the quality under control, and we're very pleased that the seaweed we're getting from that supplier is very low in moisture and sand, so it's high quality seaweed for us to use. And as I said, that means it goes through our production processing facility much more efficiently and leads to better yields and helped our margin improvement. Elsewhere in Southeast Asia, we've consolidated our supply base in Indonesia. So we've grown one of the big suppliers we've worked with there and onboarded a new one. And that new one is already at 100 tons a month of dry seaweed coming to our facility. To put that into context, that's probably 1,000 tons of dry weight, of wet weight seaweed that they're harvesting every month on our behalf. The growth in Indonesia has helped us counterbalance a poor harvesting season in Vietnam. And I guess that also shows the benefit of having geographically diversified supply as we do see some adjustments in seasonality between different countries each year. This is the first half that we've sourced any seaweed from East Africa. That's a new supplier for us. Again, we've grown them very quickly, also capable to supply us with more than 100 tons a month. And we're very pleased with the quality from there. We're working with a supplier there that is also in partnership with the United Nations and the local government. That's led to a very stable and impressive supply chain that they've established in partnership with the local communities. So on a recent visit there, we're very pleased to see the volume available, the quality available, and the benefits that it's putting into the local communities in their market. I've mentioned here the brown seaweed. That's probably the species of seaweed that over the course of the last 2 years, we've seen more volatility in volume and in pricing. So to combat that, we've put in place a strategic arrangement with one of our brown seaweed suppliers. We've lent them some money to help them put in place additional processing equipment. Clearly, there's financial arrangements for them to repay that. But in addition, we have supply arrangements now over volume and price, which is favorable for us and takes away our exposure to the volatility in that particular market. Another thing we've done this half is to map the life cycle analysis of our seaweed. And I've got a couple of slides to take you through on that, actually, because it's very interesting. We worked with an independent party in the Netherlands who's an expert at mapping life cycle analysis. And they mapped the carbon footprint, charted the emissions of CO2 equivalent from our process, which starts from the harvesting of the seaweed through the processing and all the way to the delivery of the end product to our customers. They calculated that the direct CO2 emissions of that process is 433 kilos of CO2 equivalent per ton of ocean feed. You add to that 163 kilograms of corporate overhead emissions to get to the total of, I think it's 596 kilograms. Now, if you look at the direct carbon emissions of 433 kilograms per ton of ocean feed, we then compare it to the CO2 footprint of other common ingredients in animal feed, such as wheat, oats, barley. And you can see that at 0.4 of a ton, those are up at like 800 kilos each. So it's a materially lower carbon footprint. You look at something that's like soy, which has a carbon footprint of 3 tons per ton of soy, shows you that our seaweed-based ingredient has a significantly lower carbon footprint. There are some additives there that we compete against, actually, which have got CO2 footprints in the multiple tons per ton. So, we have a much lower footprint. And that's because inherently seaweed does not use arable land, it does not use fresh water, and it does not use fertilizers. So we're able to have a much lower fertilizer footprint than these other ingredients. If you go on to look at the carbon absorption of seaweed during its growing phase, pre to harvest, and you look at the reduction in feed volumes that a producer can achieve by using ocean feed, because it's got an improved feed conversion ratios. So you add those to the footprint of our production, and it shows that actually by using 1 ton of ocean feed a producer can take out 10 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions from the overall feed chain. And that's because of the low footprint of our production, the carbon that is absorbed through the growing of the seaweed, and the savings in feed that the producer can achieve by using our additive. So this is very important to our customer base, increasingly important, and something we released to them a few months ago, and they've got a lot of attention and focus on. Now, we've also made a number of progresses in R&D, and I'll ask Haddon to take you through those.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to run through 3 slides talking about our research and development, both the basic research and the customer applied research. The first slide, this slide looks at the past, and the following 2 slides will look forward. So since the IPO, 6 trials have been reported. These are in 4 different animal species, and 5 of these 6 trials were carried out in a university or research institute. Despite that, 5 of them were also carried out in cooperation with the customer. So the first trial was laying hens. Here we've seen a return on investment of 10 to 1, based primarily on better feed efficiency and higher egg production. Down the bottom, you'll also see that during this period, we were awarded a patent in laying hens. So not based on this data, but certainly related to this data. And this patent allows us to support the claims we make for ocean feed in improving egg production and egg quality in laying poultry. The second trial we did was in Pangasius catfish, a widely grown species in Asia. This is our first trial with Pangasius. Here we've seen a 14% improvement in live weight. The third and fourth trial were both in piglets. This is our biggest area of sales globally. The first trial, we've seen a return on investment of 10 to 1 in ocean feed. The second trial was quite interesting, and this was a European trial. The customer was already using 7 different gut health feed additives, including probiotics, prebiotics, plant extracts, and acids. The customer took out all 7 and replaced all 7 previous additives with ocean feed. And what he found was a better performance with ocean feed and a 4% reduction in cost of production. The final animal trial we're going to talk about is in aquaculture, in shrimp. This was also done in Asia with a leading shrimp producer, but run in a university for a specific reason. Here we've seen a 10% improvement in live weight gain in the shrimp when they were fed with our seaweed blend. We also did a challenge trial, which is why it was run at university. And that challenge was with Vibrio. And Vibrio is a very important disease in shrimp globally, causes high mortalities. And here we've seen a reduction in mortality in the challenge trial from 57% down to 40%. The last trial we have there is a mode of action trial, looking at the ability of seaweed to bind mycotoxins, which is a problem globally in animal feed, and also to bind 2 gut pathogens, namely Clostridia perfringens and E. coli. And in this trial, our product bound both the mycotoxins and the gut pathogens, allowing us to start to make some new claims. So if we now go from looking back on the trials we just finished to looking forward on the trials that we're now commissioning or running, and first we'll start with the research and development trials to develop our knowledge and our applications. The first one is a mode of action, looking at the composition and the bioactivity of different seaweeds. This is to allow us to diversify our supply chain, to allow us to use different seaweeds, and also to produce seaweeds that might, for example, give us new bioactivities or new claims in front of the customer. So this is very important and will, I presume, be quite a long-term project going forward into the future. The second and third trials here refer back to the last trial we talked about in the previous page, and here we have moved from laboratory trials to animal trials, looking at mycotoxin binding and looking at the ability of seaweed to bind Clostridium perfringens and therefore reduce necrotic enteritis, which is one of the main diseases today, particularly in antibiotic-free poultry. The next 4 trials are all focused on methane reduction in ruminants. You'll have seen a lot, even in the popular press, around seaweed and methane reduction. To be honest, there's a lot of noise and not a lot of data. What we have done is invest some of our IPO funds to set up 4 trials. These trials normally cost around €250,000, and these trials have been run in the top quality research institutes across Europe and across North America. We haven't actually had to pay €250,000 for each of these trials. We have had sponsorship from both the universities themselves because of the interest in methane reduction, and also by one commercial company. So these trials are running. The first trial reports Q4 this year, going through to Q4 next year. So within the next 12 to 16 months, these trials will be reported and will tell us where we are with methane reduction with our product. Anybody who watched Country File on Sunday would have seen that they focused a bit on salmon, and particularly on mortality in farmed salmon, which runs up to, according to Country File at least, runs up to 25%. We've just started a trial in the west of Ireland looking at the effect of our product in salmon, both in fresh water and in salt water, both in terms of disease and things like sea lice infestations. So again, that trial will report middle of next year. So that's all the research trials. Mark also mentioned our pipeline, the trials we run with customers to develop new customers. When we met at the IPO a few months back, we had around 15 of these trials. 5 or 6 of those were reported 2 slides ago, and we have managed to replace those with more trials. We're now up to 22 trials. And here I would draw your attention to 5 of these trials. If you look at the right-hand column, there are 5 trials with a potential value of greater than €1 million. These trials are in piglets, in poultry, and piglets and poultry. And these trials are with top 5 producers in the US, in Thailand, and in Italy. So added together, those 5 new trials we've commissioned in the last few weeks with our customers would have a value of close to €8 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Haddon. Thank you, Mark. I'd like to spend a little bit of time going into some more detail on the financial statements, and we'll start with the income statement. Initially, to reiterate the point Mark made about the strong revenue growth we've seen half year on half year, 66% in total, and that's coming largely from our acquisition of new customers, which is leading to a continued volume growth of 40%. That's continuing the trend we've seen for a number of years now. But it's not just that, it's also an increase in average selling prices. What we've seen is, as we've moved away from the environment of offering sales concessions to our customers who had been struggling with the high cost of shipping, that's now come down. We've been able to remove those, and particularly as we take on new customers, we're able to achieve a consistently higher selling price. So if we're achieving a further 18% revenue growth through that. We've seen some adverse impacts of currency movements. Much of our sales are denominated in US dollars, and we've lost a little bit on the conversion to euros. But it's not been enormous. But I must say big thing that struck me in the short time I've been here has been the strength of our growth in gross margins. We quoted earlier the 0.4 million euros increase, but it's particularly striking is the margin percent growing from 24 to 36. That's really strong. What we're seeing is that the FX impact on revenues is not impacting margin. Our seaweed purchases are also in dollars, so we're seeing a very, very similar reduction in costs, and the impact on margin is neutral. So those price increases we're getting from customers are flowing straight to gross margin, straight to the bottom line. What we're also finding is that we've improved the quality of our seaweed procurement. And so with lower moisture contents, lower sand contents, the raw material is flowing far better through the factory. We're getting much lower yield losses, which is having a great impact on the margin too. So that's really encouraging. We've also seen increases in our operating expenses. Our like-for-like expenses have increased some 350,000 euros half year on half year, and much of this is in our staff costs. What we've seen since the 1st of January last year is we've added a CEO, we've added a CFO, we've added a technical director, and we've added some additional resource in the US sales team. We've incurred more travel costs. We've added an inflationary staff pay award, which is all adding to additional costs within the business. So our improved gross margins, our additional operating expenses are leaving EBITDA flat year on year. But what we are seeing is that now that recruitment is in place, our operating expenses are going to remain stable now for the rest of the year and will support continued growth into the future. We have, of course, had some non-operating expenses. The IPO transaction earlier in the year incurred costs on the P&L of 750,000. It's a one-off. It won't be there next year, but the impact has been to hit our loss for the year, for the half year, to be 2.2 million euros compared to 1.3 loss last year. If we focus on the balance sheet and cash flow, the thing that really stands out is that we are in a strong cash position now that the IPO has completed. We've been able to clear borrowings we had with a related party. We've converted convertible loan notes into shares, which is leaving us free of external debt. We've increased our inventory holdings, both seaweed, raw materials, and our stocks of semi-finished goods. That's allowing us to support the growth in revenues. And a small adverse impact of the additional revenue has been an increase in trade debtors. We're managing that very closely, though, as we take on a new customer. We put new payment terms in place, and we've seen an improvement in our debtor days compared to last year, which is encouraging, and we will maintain that.
Yeah, so as I said, we've just reported growth in revenue, strong growth in revenue for the first half of this year, and we see that continuing. We have the benefit of this pipeline that Haddon and his team build with potential customers, where they are committing time and committing resource to trial the product. And so if they see the results that we've seen from our trials, and they see that in their own system, we have a high success rate of converting them into customers. So that gives us the basis for the confidence in the ongoing growth. So look, we've experienced very strong and in line with expectation customer revenues and conversion in Asia and the Americas. And we've seen probably some delays with customers, particularly in Europe. I guess the result of that is, or the cause of that is some of the direct impacts that we see in that market of the rise in feed ingredients on customers, and the fact that some of those customers are inherently more entrenched with some of the existing additives that they use. Nevertheless, we see overall, through our other important markets around the world, strong growth continuing, and customer conversion happening. In addition, Andy mentioned that at the top line revenue point, whilst it doesn't impact profitability, the FX of reporting in euros and selling in dollars has had another impact on probably the reported revenue line. So we're now guiding to a minimum reported revenue for this full year of 3.4 million euros. Turning to the longer term outlook for 2024 and beyond, as I said, we're continuing to have customers trial the product and commit their own resources and time to trial the product, and that gives us good visibility over who will buy the product in future years. We've got investments in R&D, which is showing even more applications that we can demonstrate for the product, which obviously increases the target market that we can sell to. We've managed to get supply chain growing to match that. And overall, I'd say the customer base is looking for increasingly sustainable solutions to help them have improved profitability and sustainability in their feed chains through their production system. So that is all supportive background to the growth that we as a company believe we can deliver on. So I'll hand over for Q&A now.
Perfect. Mark, Haddon, Andy, thank you very much for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab, which is situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review those questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. As you can see, we've received a number of questions throughout today's presentation. And Mark, if I could just hand over to you just to chair the Q&A, then what I'll do is I'll pick up from you at the end.
Certainly. Right, there's a question there on what products are we replacing and what additional benefits do we offer? And commercially, are our products more appealing than the alternatives? Haddon, why don't you take that?
Okay, you remember when I talked about the trials we had completed. There was one trial where we took out 7 additives, and those additives included a probiotic, at least one prebiotic, several plant extracts, and acids. So those are essentially our competitors, particularly in Europe. We don't have many, if any, seaweed competitors. In the US and Latin America, Asia to some extent, we also compete against things like antibiotics. But really we compete with the probiotics and prebiotic. It's the market we're in, and not with other seaweed suppliers.
And the commercial attractiveness of our product versus those?
Well, we've seen from the European trial that when we took out 7 additives, it's obviously cheaper to put in seaweed than 7 different additives, and we improved or reduced the cost of production by 4%.
Yeah, and I think overall, when we approach new customers, it's not just the headline price per ton, which is important, but the return on investment that they see from using the product. So pairing the cost of what our product is, less the cost of what they're replacing, plus the production benefits that they see from using our product in their recipes through their trials. There's another question on customers. So new products can take longer to gain market traction than expected. What feedback have we had on that so far? I guess maybe I'd start with saying, yes, we do see varied traction amongst different customers. We have those customers that complete a trial, see the benefit, and then immediately buy the product. We've got some, I think we flagged that in Europe, where we're seeing more of a delay in that process. And some of that is probably because of the dynamic that Haddon mentioned. Some customers have got a lot more ingredients that have been in the diet for longer. And so, replacing one does take a little bit longer, particularly if, the nutritionist has used that for years. We've got track record of doing that, but that can impact the timing. I think also in an environment like now, some of our customers are finding the cost of their core ingredients going up. One of our distributors in Europe the other day used the expression with me that, customers are looking to feed to survive as opposed to feed to thrive. So the customers that are undergoing that dynamic, maybe just taking longer to make that decision because they've got other issues going on in their business. When everything's going well, it's quite easy to get them to make a decision quite quickly. But again, I think we're seeing a regional variation in that, where we're getting quicker conversion probably at the moment in Asia and the US. Okay, there's a question here on how much revenue our current sourcing can support and how do we balance demand versus supply. I guess we're fortunate in that, you know, the pipeline of customers trialing the product give us a good indication of what future revenues we have and what supply we need to build to feed into that. So, you know, as I said, we've made progress this year in increasing the volume of seaweed that we've purchased, and we've done that by diversifying the regions that we buy from. We are always investigating additional regions, and we have work ongoing in a number of regions that I haven't talked about today to identify what seaweed we can source from there in future. You know, there's no phone number you can call if you suddenly need an extra 400 tons of green seaweed. You have to pre-develop those supply chains with suppliers on the ground. I guess the balancing act that the question refers to is we can time that because we don't suddenly get a big customer order that we're not aware of is coming down the pipeline because we've seen it come through the trials. So we are able to match the likely timing of those with the development of the supply chain that we're doing in parallel. So to date, we've been very good at matching that. We've never been kept short, and we've never had an overstocking of seaweed. And you know, by diversifying the customer base and continually diversifying the supply chain, we can continue that. There is a question here on what is the benefit of using wild seaweed as opposed to cultivated seaweed? Yes, I mean, I mentioned that when I talked about the World Bank report. They talk a lot about cultivated seaweed because the data on that is easier to measure. In fact, the wild seaweeds, and particularly the ones that we use, are invasive. So in nearly all instances where it's harvested, it is growing there, and it's growing there quickly on the excess nutrients, nitrates, phosphates that are in the water. And with the increase in human activity, particularly agricultural activity, there are increased nutrients in the sea. So the biomass that is growing there is more than has been growing previously. Quite often we'll go to an area, you know, where villages are cultivating seaweed, and they're selling those into the pharmaceutical industry or the cosmetics industry. And we'll say to them, well, look at that biomass which is floating. It's not attached to the seabed. It's floating just off their shoreline. So do you use that? And they say, no, we don't use that. It clogs up the waterways. It interferes with our fishing activities. And that's the seaweed that we use. So it's beneficial for them because they take it out of the sea, they clear their seaways, which restores their fishing, and they get money for buying that biomass. So, you know, using wild source seaweed is more complicated because you need a broader geographic region, but it definitely is environmentally more beneficial. And as Haddon just told me, it's a lot less expensive than cultivated seaweeds that go into you know, the human food chain or the cosmetics and pharmaceutical chains. And then there's a question here in a different nature, which is, are you seeing new institutional interest in the company post the IPO? Yeah, look, we've announced results this morning. We're seeing investors the rest of this week, some of which are invested in us, some of which are not invested in us. I think, you know, the benefit of what Ocean Harvest Technology does is that we are a growth business. We're a growth business with a demonstrated ability to improve profitability as we grow. And we are improving the productivity and sustainability of an industry which is enormous, which is the animal feed industry, and needs those ongoing improvements in the industry. So the very strong end market we can sell into, there is a very strong rationale for using our products in that market, and we can demonstrate that we can do that profitably. So that's appealing to institutions. Obviously, all institutional investors have varied investment criteria, you know, but the IPO was largely sold to institutional investors. We've really been targeting more individual investors post the IPO, and certainly we've seen an uptake on the register of those investors since the IPO. So that, from what I can see on the screen, are all the questions.
Perfect. Mark, Had and Andy, thank you very much for that. I think you've addressed all those questions from investors. And of course, the company will review all questions submitted today and will publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. But just before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company, Mark, could I just ask you for a few closing comments?
Yeah, look, thank you for your time today. Apologies for the tech glitch that happened on one of those slides. We've announced our results today. We've demonstrated in those results that we're continuing to grow the sales of the business and the profitability of the business. The company is in a strong cash position post our IPO, and we're using that to continue to invest in R&D, sales and marketing, and the supply chain to grow our business into what we think is a very exciting market. And as I mentioned, I'd encourage those of you to go onto the World Bank website, have a look at their recently announced report, because it makes interesting reading and is very supportive of what we as a company are trying to achieve. So thank you for your time today.
Mark, Had and Andy, thanks once again for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close the session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Ocean Harvest Technology Group PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good morning to you all.